Right. So I want to go over the call settings in the agents. I'll kind of go one by one. So first sentence, it's basically a way to almost pre-recorded. Right? You can name a sentence. That's hello name. And what name will do, that'll actually in this section look at the custom value of the name. Right. So if you're connected to Go High Level, for example, and you have a first name and a last name, and you just put hello name right here, it'll actually say the person's name in that field. Right? So this is the most common one. It's just hello name. The second thing, you're almost always going to want to do this. If you hit a voicemail, you probably want to hang up, but you could also leave a message. Next is total or max duration. This is setting a limit to the length of the call. So if somebody's, they want to mess with an AI, asking a million questions, sometimes they can just increase the call length. You might want to, if you know your call shouldn't ever take longer than 5 minutes, maybe you're going to put it at 5 minutes. And then what'll happen is the second it hits 5 minutes, it will hang up the call. So that's something to be aware of. Language, any of these that you see a drop down, you have to delete the text in order to see the different languages. We actually have more. We'll be adding them soon. So you should see more than these, but this is how you'll do it. Select English. Model. Same thing goes for this. You're going to delete it. Select the drop down. Enhanced, Base, Turbo, GPT-4. So enhanced is actually Anthropic or Claude. And this is probably the one I use the most. Base is ChatGPT 3.5. Turbo is a custom LLM. And GPT-4 is GPT-4. Right, so my recommendation is to stick with enhanced. Turbo might be the winner pretty soon. But as it stands right now, enhanced is good. You could try all the different ones and see what you like. Select enhanced. Next, you have voice speed. Should be self-explanatory. The higher you put it, the faster the voice speaks. Right? Now, don't mix that up with interruption threshold. This is basically how much speaking it takes from the customer, for example, if you're calling a customer, to interrupt the agent. So this is kind of a double-edged sword where you don't want to set it too high because that's ultimately going to increase the latency. Right? It's going to take longer to respond because it's waiting 500 milliseconds now. And you also don't want to set it too low because any noise will basically interrupt the agent. So typically somewhere around 150 to 200 is where I'll keep it. If I'm asking a lot of questions that have maybe longer answers where people are going to pause, and I don't care that they know, it's an AI or it's less human, you might want to bump this up. Right? So that's what interruption threshold is. Like I said, usually 150 to 200 is what I keep it at for most of my use cases. Temperature, this is pretty standard on any AI. They have a temperature, and what that refers to is the variability of the responses. So the higher the temperature, the more variability in the responses. The lower the temperature, the less variability. So the more consistent the AI is going to be. The downside of this is sometimes the conversations are less fluid, less human-like when you have it really low. But when you put it up, sometimes it's not going to do the things you want it to do as often. So you got to find a balance. This is one that I usually keep at 0.3, 0.4 for most use cases. Sometimes if I'm okay with it being very highly variable, then I'll put it up a little bit more. But it really depends on the use case. Wait for greeting. This basically waits for the prospect to say something. So if I say wait for greeting true, it's going to wait for, let's say we're calling someone. They're going to pick up the phone and then they're going to say something. Then it will finally respond. If I have it set for false, what will happen is, let's say we call someone, they pick up. The second they pick up, it should start responding. Right? With this first sentence, if you have a first sentence. AMD, this is just a way to navigate IVR trees. 99% of you are going to leave this as false. So if you are looking to do IVR trees, feel free to reach out directly and you can set this to true. Speed max or optimize for, I would always set this to speed max. think it almost comes off unrealistic when you're focusing it on quality on the voice or the audio technically. So speed max is what I recommend here. This will have the least latency. Speech flexibility, you can mess around with these. There's 3 different options here. Speech 1, speech 2, speech 3. It's going to change the way that the AI strings together sentences, says words, things like that. So I recommend just messing around. I usually do 1. It doesn't really make a big difference one way or the other. Stability is the inflections or emotions in the voice of the agent. So the higher up it is, the more stable. The lower, the less stable. So, to get it to sound more human-like, you do want it to have some emotion, some inflection, but you also don't want it to be unrealistic. 0.6 is usually where I keep this. But now that you understand, you can do whatever you want, test it out, see what you like. Similarity, we are using essentially pre-recorded voices when we do this. And this is basically how similar it is to the pre-recorded voice. So maybe you have a voice that you really like, but it's just off a little bit. You could start to kind of tone this down and see how it changes the voice. Maybe you like it better as you mess with it. I usually just put 0.8 though. So up to you. And that is voice settings.